Well, Mary Kay, bad news for the Browns. Joe Thomas has decided to retire, hang it up after having his 10,363 consecutive snap streak snapped when he left the game against Tennessee. Just couldn't muster up what he needed to come back for another season. And obviously, you've covered him for a long time. I've covered him for the last few years, and just really one of the great guys to cover in this league.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, he was sort of the voice of the Cleveland Browns, the face of the Cleveland Browns. He embodied anything that's been right about this football team over all these years of losing year after year after year. He wanted to be here. He didn't want to be traded anywhere else. He wanted to finish his career here, and of course, he had nothing left to prove. He's done it all, and you know, what more can you say about Joe Thomas?
Yeah, obviously born and raised in Wisconsin, but really as much a Clevelander as anyone since he came here in 2007. Of course, started his career with that 10-6 season and just could never come close to getting back to the playoffs or helping get this franchise back to the playoffs. And but still, every Thursday, he'd go up there, he'd talk, he'd hold court. His press conferences were some of the most entertaining press conferences we've had from a player.
And in addition to those, if anyone wanted to just stop by his locker and chit-chat, he would stand there for a half an hour and talk to somebody if that's what they wanted to do. So he was great in the locker room. He played injured. I mean, he played through torn MCLs in his knees. He fought through a lot of back pain, a lot of knee pain, but he always had the best attitude in the world. And you just won't find a better guy than Joe Thomas.
And really, in typical Joe Thomas fashion, after that win over then San Diego, he coined the pierogi Prince of Parma for Jamie Meter, who had the blocked field goal. It was just very typical of Joe. And listen, on the field, one of the best we've ever seen play the position. You know, there's so many clips on Twitter of him just dominating guys, teaching really great pass rushers, especially young pass rushers, lessons at that left tackle position. One of those rare guys you could leave on an island against anybody. And you know, 5 years from now, we're going to be covering his Hall of Fame induction. Yeah,
and you know what? I remember the very first time we interviewed Joe Thomas when he was a rookie. He said it was his goal to make the Hall of Fame. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I've heard that before from a few other guys. We've had people say that, but he's actually backed it up. He lived up to that. He had a dream and a goal to be able to do that. He knew that that was the level that he could play at. It's incredibly remarkable what he's been able to accomplish with all the quarterbacks that he's had to block for. 28 starting quarterbacks for the Browns since 1999. He hasn't had all those, but he's had probably 20-some. So just a remarkable, remarkable career. And like you said, he will be, I'm sure, a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah, and really in these last few years, one of the things that has stood out is in that young locker room. He was so revered. Here's a guy in his 30s, you know, married with kids, and even among all those young players, he was still as revered as any player and looked up to by all of those young players as they came in.
Absolutely, 100%. He was a great leader, great guy in the locker room. And the other thing that we watched him do, and you've written extensively about this, over the last couple of years, he's really come out of his shell and become somewhat of a media darling. I mean, he's got the Tomahawk podcast. He had the Joe Thomas Hour. You know, he's a very funny guy, very personable, and it was almost as though he were, you know, trying to plan out and map out life after football and try to sort of, you know, end up, you know, in some kind of a media job, which I'm sure he will, and he deserves it.
Yeah, we're definitely going to see him in a broadcast booth somewhere or a TV studio somewhere in his future. And of course, we're going to have all sorts of Joe Thomas stuff for you throughout the day, throughout the week. And 5 years from now, we'll have full coverage of his Hall of Fame induction. All of it's going to be at cleveland.com/Browns.